The following account concerns a case from the closing years of the 19th century, a period marked by quiet, hardship, and limited certainty in many rural districts of the United States. We now proceed to the mountainous region of Appalachia in the county of Greenbrier within the state of West Virginia. At that time, Greenbrier County was a sparsely populated rural area defined by scattered homesteads, small farming communities, and long distances separating neighbors from one another. Daily life was governed by physical labor, seasonal routine, and a dependence on local knowledge rather than formal institutions. Professional medical care and legal oversight were often located many miles away, separated from individual households by rough and difficult terrain. The final decade of the 19th century represented a period of material and social limitation across much of rural Appalachia. Medical science remained rudimentary. Formal forensic practice was uncommon, and sudden deaths occurring within the home were frequently attributed to natural causes without extended investigation, particularly when no immediate signs of disturbance were visible. Opportunities for independent redress or institutional scrutiny were limited, especially in households situated far from town centers. Within these environments, women largely remained within the domestic sphere, dependent upon family authority and long-established custom. Superstition and inherited belief were not treated merely as private conviction, but as accepted explanations in the absence of written record, medical certainty, or formal legal procedure. Elva Zona Heaster, approximately 23 years of age, resided in her mother's home in Greenbrier County, where each day followed a consistent domestic pattern. Her responsibilities included preparing meals at the hearth, carrying water, tending the fire, and assisting with household labor under her mother's direction. Her movements were generally limited to the house, the surrounding yard, and the short stretch of road leading to nearby neighbors or the local church. In the year 1895, Zona gave birth to a son outside of marriage. The child was placed with relatives, after which Zona returned to her mother's household. There, she resumed her routine, rising early, completing assigned chores, and remaining within the home for the majority of each day. Mary Jane Heaster maintained close oversight of her daughter's conduct. She attended church regularly, received neighbors at the door, and discussed family matters in accordance with the accepted customs of the district. When the subject of marriage arose, her opinions were expressed plainly and enforced within the household. In October of 1896, Edward Stribling Shoe arrived in the area and began work as a blacksmith. He was regularly seen at the forge during daylight hours repairing tools and shoeing horses for local farmers. Through ordinary local contact, Zona became acquainted with him, and the two were soon observed traveling together along the road and attending church services. The marriage followed shortly thereafter and was conducted despite her mother's objections. Mary Jane Heaster was known to have spoken against the match on the grounds of Mr. Shoe's prior marital history, which included an earlier separation following reported violence and the unexplained death of a second wife. After the ceremony, Zona left her mother's home and took up residence with her husband. Visits to her family became infrequent, and neighbors later noted that she was seen less often in familiar places as her daily activities were now confined to her husband's household. On the morning of the 23rd of January, 1897, Edward Stribling Shoe left his work at the forge and sent a neighbor's boy, Andy Jones, to his house with a message. The boy was instructed to ask Mrs. Shoe what provisions were required for the day's meals. Upon entering the house, the boy found Elva Zona Heaster lying at the foot of the staircase. He called out to her and received no reply. Stepping closer, he spoke again and waited briefly, but observed no movement. Followed. He then withdrew from the room, left the house at once, and ran back along the road toward the forge, where he delivered word to Mr. Shoe without delay. Mr. Shoe returned to the house shortly. Thereafter, he lifted his wife's head into his arms and remained beside her, calling for assistance. Neighbors were summoned, and a message was sent for the local physician. During this interval, Mr. Shoe remained close to the body and did not permit others to reposition it. Dr. George Washington Knapp, arrived approximately 1 hour later and began his examination while the deceased remained clothed and in the position in which she had been found. Throughout the examination, Mr. Shu continued to support his wife's head in his arms and stayed close beside the body. When the doctor attempted to adjust the position of the head, it remained held and was not moved for any extended handling. As a result, the examination of the neck was brief and incomplete. In his initial statement, Dr. Knapp attributed the death to a sudden fainting episode. This conclusion was later amended to complications associated with childbirth. No signs of disturbance were recorded within the house at that time, and no further inquiry was ordered. The death was entered as natural, and preparations for burial proceeded without delay. Following the medical examination, Edward Stribling Shu undertook the preparation of his wife's body. He dressed the deceased himself, selecting a high-necked garment and fastening it closely about the throat. A scarf was then arranged around the neck and secured in place. These tasks were completed without assistance, and others present were not invited to take part. Throughout the preparation, Mr. Shu remained positioned near the head and upper body. When neighbors approached, he stood between them and the deceased, adjusting the clothing and maintaining his place at the side of the coffin. The customary practice of female relatives attending to the body was not observed on this occasion. On the following day, the remains were conveyed to the house of Mary Jane Hester, situated on Big Sewell Mountain. During the viewing, Mr. Shu stood at the head of the coffin and did not step aside for extended periods. When visitors leaned forward, he adjusted the scarf or repositioned the collar, keeping the neck covered from view. The burial took place shortly thereafter at the cemetery of Saul Chapel Methodist Church. No further examination was requested prior to interment. Local notice of the death appeared only briefly, and the matter soon passed from public attention as the grave was closed. In the days following the burial, Mary Jane Hester remained at her home on Big Sewell Mountain and did not immediately resume her usual routine. She was observed keeping the household indoors after nightfall and speaking little when neighbors called at the door. Lamps were kept lit late into the evening, and the rooms were left undisturbed throughout the night. On several consecutive nights, Mary Jane later stated that she did not sleep. She remained seated in the house, rose at intervals, and was seen the following mornings to repeat the same account to those who came to visit. She described a figure standing within the room after dark and recounted the details of what she claimed had been shown to her, giving the same description each time without alteration. According to her statements, the account concerned her daughter's death and the condition of the neck. These details were repeated in conversation with family members and neighbors, and were not confined to private prayer or reflection. The account passed from house to house along the road and was discussed openly, without immediate contradiction. During this period, no formal action was taken. The burial remained undisturbed, and the official cause of death was unchanged. Nevertheless, the repeated retelling of the account continued, and its consistency was noted by those who heard it as it became a subject of local discussion. Remark in the days that followed. Within the surrounding district, discussion of the death became more frequent. Neighbors compared recollections of the funeral and of Mr. Shu's conduct during the preparation of the body. These conversations took place at doorways, along fences, and after church services without formal complaint or written record. At length, Mary Jane Hester traveled from Big Sewell Mountain to consult John Alfred Preston, the local prosecuting attorney. She appeared in person and gave her account in full, repeating the details she had previously described to others. The statement was delivered without interruption and concluded without request for immediate action. Mr. Preston listened and did not dismiss the matter at once. He questioned Mary Jane at length, asked her to restate portions of her account, and made note of its consistency. Following this interview, he sought further information by speaking again with Dr. Knapp and others who had been present at the house on the day of the death. During this interval, no public notice was issued, and Edward Stribling Shu remained at liberty. Daily activity in the district continued as before while the matter awaited further consideration, suspended between settled record and renewed inquiry. On the 22nd of February, 1897, formal action was taken at the direction of the prosecuting attorney. Arrangements were made for the exhumation of Elva Zona Heaster's body. The work was carried out at a small one-room schoolhouse near the burial ground, where space and light permitted closer examination. The coffin was opened in the presence of the authorities, members of the coroner's jury, and the local physician. The remains were lifted and placed upon a table. Clothing and wrappings were removed in sequence, and the position of the head was adjusted for inspection. The examination proceeded over the course of several hours and was conducted without interruption. During this examination, the condition of the neck was observed and recorded. The vertebrae were found to be displaced, with injury consistent with fracture. The structures of the throat showed clear signs of compression, and markings upon the skin corresponded with the pressure of fingers. These findings were noted in detail and agreed upon by those present. Edward Stribling, Shoe, was in attendance during the proceedings and objected repeatedly to the handling of the body. His objections were set aside, and the examination continued to its conclusion. No explanation consistent with natural causes was offered for the injuries observed. At the close of the examination, the coroner's jury reached a determination that the death had not occurred by natural means. The remains were then returned for burial. With this finding entered into record, the matter passed from private discussion and household remark into formal accusation, and the course of events was thereafter fixed by what had now been formally observed. After the remains were returned for burial and the officials departed, those who had gathered did not disperse at once. Small groups remained outside the schoolhouse and along the road, speaking in lowered voices and repeating the account long given by Mary Jane Hester. It was remarked that the injuries now recorded matched the warnings she had spoken of before any order for examination had been made. Some stated plainly that the signs had been shown to her in advance, while others noted only that without her insistence, the body would have remained undisturbed. By the following day, it was commonly said in the district that the discovery owed its beginning not to official suspicion, but to a warning delivered to the mother by the deceased herself, recounted through the visions she had described during her dreams. Once the findings of the examination had been entered into record, the matter was taken up by the local authorities without further delay. A formal report detailing the condition of the remains was prepared and submitted, setting out the injuries observed to the neck and throat, and noting that no natural cause could account for them. Copies of this report were circulated among the officials responsible for the next course of action. Edward Stribling, Shoe, was taken into custody shortly thereafter and conveyed to the county jail at Lewisburg. No resistance was recorded at the time of his arrest. The decision was made on the strength of the medical findings alone, without reliance upon the accounts that had circulated previously among the neighbors. An inquest was convened, at which those who had been present at the house on the day of the death were called to give evidence. Andy Jones described being sent to the house and finding Mrs. Shoe lying motionless at the foot of the stairs. Neighbors testified to Mr. Shoe's conduct during the interval before the doctor arrived and to his actions during the preparation of the body. Dr. George Washington Knapp gave evidence concerning his initial examination and acknowledged that the inspection of the neck had not been complete. Mary Jane Hester was also called and gave her statement. She confined her testimony to matters of observation and repetition, recounting the steps she had taken to bring her concerns to the attention of the authorities. When asked about the substance of her concern, she stated that the account she had repeated involved a domestic dispute on the evening preceding the death, during which her daughter had been said to have angered her husband by failing to prepare a meat supper. No further elaboration on the source of this account was entered into evidence, and no questions were permitted on that point. The trial opened on the 22nd of June, 1897, at the Greenbrier County Courthouse. Public attendance was considerable, and seating was filled early each day. The witnesses called were the same individuals who had appeared at the inquest, and their evidence was delivered in similar order. In addressing the jury, the prosecuting attorney placed emphasis not only upon the medical testimony, but also upon the sequence of events within the household. It was put before the jury that the injuries observed were consistent with a sudden act of violence arising from a domestic quarrel rather than accident or illness. The absence of any alternative explanation, coupled with the defendant's conduct before and after the death, was presented as establishing both act and cause. Edward Stribling, Shue, did not call any witnesses in his defense and offered no statement to the court throughout the proceedings. He remained seated and made no recorded response to the evidence as it was given. After the close of the testimony, the jury retired for deliberation. They returned after a short interval and delivered a verdict, finding the prisoner guilty of murder in the first degree. In accepting the verdict, the court recorded that the offense arose from an act of fatal violence committed during a domestic dispute within the marital household. Sentence was then pronounced in the customary form, committing Mr. Shue to imprisonment for the remainder of his natural life. Following the verdict, Edward Stribling Shue was removed from the courthouse and placed under guard. Outside, a crowd gathered along the road and in the surrounding yard, remaining after the court had adjourned. Voices were raised calling for immediate punishment, and it was reported that several men urged that the sentence be carried out without delay. In response, the sheriff took measures to prevent disorder. Mr. Shue was moved from the town under escort and concealed for a short time in the surrounding countryside. Additional assistance was requested, and arrangements were made to convey the prisoner beyond the county to ensure his safety and the preservation of lawful custody. The agitation did not subside at once. Groups continued to assemble, and threats were spoken openly. As a result, four individuals identified as having organized the gathering were later charged for their conduct, and formal notice was taken of the attempt to interfere with the course of justice. During this period, Mary Jane Hester returned to her home on Big Sewell Mountain. She was seen once again attending church and receiving neighbors in the manner she had before. When spoken to about the outcome of the trial, she repeated only that the truth had been brought to light and offered no further account beyond what had already been entered into record. In the district at large, discussion of the case continued, though its focus had shifted. Some spoke chiefly of the verdict and the strength of the medical findings, while others returned to the manner in which suspicion had first arisen. It was remarked that the inquiry had begun outside official channels and had moved only later into formal procedure. Following the disturbances that arose after the verdict, arrangements were made to remove Edward Stribling Shue from local custody. Under guard, he was conveyed from the county and transferred to the state penitentiary at Moundsville, where responsibility for his confinement passed from county officers to the prison authorities. At Moundsville, Mr. Shue was received as a convicted prisoner serving a sentence of life imprisonment. His movements were thereafter governed by institutional routine, and no further proceedings relating to the case were recorded in court. No petition for review altered the standing judgment, and the conviction remained in force without modification. On the 13th of March, 1900, Edward Stribling Shue died while still in custody. The cause was recorded as illness, and no inquest connected to the original crime followed. His body was buried without public ceremony, and no marked grave was entered into common notice. Following the death of Edward Stribling Shue, no further legal action was taken in relation to the case. The conviction remained on record, and the findings of the court were not revisited by any subsequent authority. With the prisoner deceased, the matter was considered closed in both legal and administrative terms. Mary Jane Hester continued to reside on Big Sewell Mountain in the years that followed. She did not withdraw any statement she had previously given, and was recorded as having repeated the same account when asked. No formal challenge to her testimony was pursued after the conclusion of the trial. In time, the case entered local and state record as an unusual proceeding, distinguished by the manner in which suspicion first arose and by the sequence through which official inquiry was eventually set in motion. A historical marker was later placed near the burial ground, noting the circumstances under which the conviction had been secured. Elva Zona Heaster Shue was buried at Soul Chapel Cemetery. Her grave remained undisturbed, and no further examination was ordered. She was 23 years old.